Zenwork Compliance Solutions. We're so happy that you could make it on a Friday afternoon. We're really glad that you took this time out of your day to learn about some of our e-filing. I am your moderator. My name is Geneva Brock, and I'm the Marketing Projects Lead here at Zenwork. And I've been with Zenwork for just a little under 2 years now, and my main role is providing compliance content to you, our users, making sure that you understand what you're getting yourself into when you take on the 1099 e-filing process. Also in the session today is our host, Ed Pratt. He is our Chief Operating Officer here at Zenwork, and he's been with the team for over 5 years now, and he uses 19 plus years of experience in compliance to prepare all of you for the 1099 e-filing process. And he's a wealth of knowledge, so we're really happy to have him on the session today to lead us through some of the information that we're going to go through. To jump into this session, I'm just going to share some information about how to get CPE credit if you're on this session for that reason. You must stay on the webinar for the duration of the session. And if you happen to experience any technical issues, we just want to let you know up front that those will disallow us from being able to offer you the credit. And that is something stipulated to us by NASBA, the board that has accredited us for the CPE credit. So just remember to stay on the session for the entire duration. You also need to answer all 4 of the audience response questions that we're going to be bringing up throughout the session. Those will take the form of just questions, and we'll kind of lead you through those when we get there. But make sure that you answer all 4 of those if you're looking for CPE credit. And lastly, in the follow-up email to this session, we're going to give you some instructions on how you can get the certificate for your 1.0 CPE credit hour. So make sure to look out for that. You might want to check for your promotions box or maybe even your spam box to make sure that you're not missing that. So just keep an eye out for that in the next coming days. A few housekeeping issues. If you have any questions throughout this session, please feel free to use the webinar chat box and you can just ask us at any time. We'll be responding to those throughout the session, and then we'll also have some time for question and answer at the end. So feel free to ask those anytime, and we'll keep an eye out for those. And like I said earlier, we're going to be sending a recap email at the end of this session. And in that email, we'll send out the recording of demo, and you'll get a PDF of the slides, and those will be in a printable format, so you can share those with your office, other members of your team, anyone who you think that would be helpful for. And we'll also send any answers to the questions that we weren't able to get to during the session. And like I said before, we've got some questions for you too, and we'd love it if you'd answer those. Even if you're not looking for CPE credit during this session, we'd love for you to participate with us, and we can just learn some more about what you know about e-filing and how we can be an assistance to you through that process. Our agenda items for today, we're going to be discussing compliance changes, what's new with federal e-filing, and where is state filing headed. We'll talk about those items. We're going to explain corrections, how to do those, what are the different types, what does that process look like. And although that might not change much, if at all, from year to year, it's something that causes a lot of confusion to our users on an ongoing basis, and so we want to make sure and cover that, make sure that's understood. We're going to talk a little bit about vendor form delivery options. We're going to share some little known facts about e-filing, and then we'll kind of dive into our platform, show you what's new, tell you how to use it, make sure that you're ready for everything that you need to do going into the season. And then we'll do a little bit of question and answer portion at the end if we have the time for that. Before we jump into the session now, I'm going to go ahead and open up our first poll question. And you should be able to see that on your screen right now. That question is, how do you currently file your 1099 forms? You'll see your options there. You've got paper file, you've got e-file through the FIRE system, that's with the IRS, e-file through a third-party system, or maybe this is your first time filing and you're not actually sure how you're going to accomplish this year, and so you might not know. Make sure that you're submitting your answers by clicking that button at the bottom of your poll so that we can get those answers in. I'm gonna give this a couple more seconds here. Looks like we're just missing a few people's answers. And just a quick reminder, this is an example of one of the poll questions that you'll need to answer if you want to get CPE credit. You'll need to answer this and the 3 poll questions that follow this. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the voting now and share out these results. So it looks like many of you are e-filing through a third party, and of course we hope that that's us, Tax1099. Looks like some of you are still doing some paper filing, and then a few of you don't know, a few of you e-file through the FIRE system. Thanks so much for participating in that question with us. That's helpful information, and I hope that we can help you figure out how you want to file your forms this year. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ed, and he's going to get us started on the informational portion of our session.
All right, thanks, Geneva, and welcome everyone. Going to start with a little bit of information about federal e-filing and a couple of new things that have come up with the IRS in terms of filing your information returns. There's a new e-filing requirement for information returns, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Some information about the extensions, the Form 8809 that you may be familiar with. The IRS has changed a couple of things there on the extension option. And then some instructions for late filers of the Box 7, just making sure that you or your clients are not getting in trouble there with late filings, and talk a little bit about that. But first, for the e-filing requirement, this is a change, and this is a change that we've heard more recently the IRS has been making that they aren't going to enforce for this year, but we wanted to go ahead and make you aware of it. When we first created the webinar a couple of weeks ago, we've been doing this one for about 3 weeks now. When we first created the webinar, this was a go-ahead with the IRS, but now they're saying, maybe not. You know how that happens sometimes with the IRS. But this one is for aggregating information returns. You may be aware in the past, if you are a client for filing 250 or more of any type of form, then you had to do that as an e-file. The IRS will always accept anything smaller than that. But if you had 250 or more, or your client had 250 or more, then that was an official requirement, and that could be 250 1099 miscellaneous forms, or 250 dividend forms, or interest forms, or what have you. What they've done now is said, we're going to take all of the information returns together, and we are going to say that we're going to aggregate those together. And so if you have dividend forms and interest forms and miscellaneous forms, let's say you had 100 of each of those 3 different types of forms, the IRS is going to say, well, now you've got 300 forms total, so under your payer EIN, we want you to submit all of those as an electronic file. You can submit them as different electronic files, obviously, because they're different types of forms, but they are aggregating the totality of the information returns there and making that 250 threshold applicable across all of the forms for your payer or for your client's payers. So just something to be aware of. If you, as we saw in that poll survey, many of you are already e-filing, so you don't have to worry about that. If you file all of your forms all the time, then you don't have to worry about it. If you are paper filing, just something that you may want to be aware of. The next item is the Box 7 extension. So if you recall, a couple of years ago, Congress passed a law, I think it's 2015 actually that they passed the law, went into effect a little bit after that, but they passed a law that required Box 7 amounts on the 1099 miscellaneous forms and W-2s to be filed by January 31st, whether you paper filed or you e-filed. Prior to that, the paper filing deadline was February 28th, and the e-filing deadline was March 31st. But they decided a couple years ago to pull the Box 7 and the W-2s up to January 31st. And they did it for a good reason. I know it was kind of a pain for everybody who was doing the filing and having to convert to that date. And especially if you're an accountant, convince your clients to come along with converting to that date, because they don't always get you the detailed information in time. But they did that so that they could avoid some fraudulent tax refund payments. As you again are probably aware, because you see this stuff all the time, there are criminals who are stealing people's data, and they're using that data to file for tax refunds, and they're claiming that refund before the individual actually files for their own taxes. And so if someone had stolen my identity and filed, a return early in February and gotten a refund, then I go to file mine in March or April, the IRS is going to say, no, you've already been paid your refund. What are you doing filing this? And I'm going to be in trouble. So the IRS took some steps to try to prevent those fraudulent tax refund payments from going out. Even so, the IRS the last couple of years has allowed the Form 8809 to get you or your client an automatic 30-day extension for the Box 7 amounts or for the W-2s. So you still had to get the recipient forms or the employee forms out in the mail January 31st, but you had 30 extra days, so up to March the 2nd or so, to get your filing to the IRS, whether that was paper or e-file. This year, they've moved away from that. They've said no longer can you get a Box 7 or a W-2 extension on an automatic basis. They do have some safe harbors that we'll talk about in a minute, or that you or your client may fall into. But just be aware that that automatic extension is no longer available. So the IRS is expecting everything to be filed January 31st. So you know how they kind of will sometimes gradually move from a light enforcement to a heavier enforcement. This is part of that process. They changed the deadline a couple years ago, left the extensions alone, but now they've begun to move to enforce the extension to really make that a hard deadline of January 31st. Let's talk a little bit about those safe harbors that you or your client may find applicable to actually get a 30-day extension. There are 5 that are actually listed on the Form 8809. The 3 here are the more common ones. If you or your client is in a federally declared disaster area, so anywhere that's been declared by the federal government to be a disaster area, so California wildfires, East Coast hurricanes, all of those types of situations would be applicable, and the IRS keeps a track of where those federally declared disaster areas are. If you or your client are there, you can request a safe harbor 30-day extension. You have to do that manually. You have to do it on paper. You have to sign in ink and send that paper form into the IRS, and then the IRS will make a determination on whether or not you or your client qualifies for that 30-day extension. The second one is fire, casualty, natural disaster. So exclusive of those federally declared disaster areas, if you are working for a client who is a restaurant and they have a kitchen fire and their office is next to the kitchen, all their paperwork burns up, that's a fire that caused them not to be able to perform their operations or maintain their business records. And so you get 30 extra days for that, again, at the IRS's approval. If the person at the company who is responsible for doing the filing dies or has a serious illness, or they're just unavoidably absent for some reason, then that is also a safe harbor that the IRS will be willing to consider on a manual 8809 form to possibly grant an extension. So those are the 3 main ones. There are a couple more that may apply if you have a client who is a new business this year. So they just started, they incorporated in June. They just started hiring some contractors in August, and now they're coming to the end of their first year in business, and they're saying, well, I don't even know what a 1099 is. This is when they generally come looking for you guys as accountants and say, I need some help here. So if they are in that situation, they're filing for the first year, they can get a 30-day extension as well. Not automatic, still manual. So they do have to get that approved on paper. And then the last one is something that came up during the IRS comments period. Whenever they make changes to their forms, they put them out, and then they gather public comments for a period of time. They had some comments that came back that said, we need the open, at least a possibility of having an extension for filers who don't get timely data on third-party payee statements. So their examples were K-1s and third-party 6 statements and things like that. So that is another one, probably less applicable for most of your clients, but those of you who work in tax may be seeing that and have that situation come up. All right, so with that, I think I'm going to flip it back over to Geneva for a moment to do our next survey question.
Yeah, thanks for all that information. I'm gonna pull up that second survey question. Which box on the 1099 miscellaneous form is no longer eligible for that 8809 automatic extension? Is it box 1, box 2, box 7, box 14? Go ahead and put in your answers there. Looks like we're already questioning quite a few. Couple more seconds here, make sure everyone has an opportunity. And just one more reminder that if you're looking for CPE credit for the session, you need to go ahead and answer this question. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the voting here and share out these results. Looks like most of you have gotten that question correct. It is the box 7 that is not eligible anymore for that automatic extension. So if you've been relying on that 30 days of automatic extension in the past to get your forms all completed and all sent into the IRS, just be aware that you won't have that safety net to catch you unless you are falling into one of those safe harbors that Ed discussed earlier. I'll go ahead and stop sharing those results and pass the presentation back over to Ed for some more information.
All right, thanks, Geneva. And so continuing on with another IRS e-file item that you may need to be aware of. This is concerning Box 7 forms that are being filed after the January 31st deadline. If you've been using Tax 1099 the last couple of years, you may have noticed that if you or a client file a batch of forms and the forms have, let's say there's 10 that have Box 7 amounts, and then they've got one for their landlord that is a rent, a Box 1 amount. When you go through the process to submit those, you can set up the schedule date, and you could do two different schedule dates for that. The Box 7s could be January 31st, and the Box 1 could be March 31st. When you go through and you submit those, we actually separate those inside of our system, and we send you two different reference numbers. We send you one for the Box 1 form for rents and one for the Box 7 forms for the non-employee compensation. The reason that we've been doing that is because the IRS wants to get those separately, and so we, just being in communication with IRS, have known that and have been preparing our system and doing it that way since the initiation of that January 31st deadline. What they're saying now is that if you have any of your Box 7 amounts that you're filing late, maybe you're filing those Box 7 amounts on February the 15th, the client just didn't get that information in time, and you had to file them on February 15th. And you're also filing some Box 1 amounts on February 15th. The IRS is going to consider all those as one batch and as a Box 7 due date batch, so January 31st, and they're going to consider all those forms to be late. So the message here is that you want to be sure that you're filing your forms separately. If you're filing Box 7s after January 31st and you're filing some other types of forms, you just want to make sure those go separately. Again, we already do that, so you don't have to worry about it if you're using Tax 1099. But I think at least one person responded that they're electronically filing themselves, or some other people said that they are paper filing. So something to be aware of if you do have that situation where you have to file something with a Box 7 amount on it late. Just make sure you don't file it at the same time as you're filing any forms with other box amounts on them. Going to switch gears and talk a little bit about state filing now. So state filing falls into a couple of different categories. The most of the states fall into what's called the combined federal state filing program. There's 30 or so states that participate in this combined federal state filing program, and that's really just a data sharing that the IRS has set up. So e-filers like us, when we file to the IRS, we just kind of automatically check a box at the top of our electronic files that go to the IRS, and that says participate in the combined federal state filing program, and that means your clients are all covered if they're living or working in one of those states that requires combined federal state filing program compliance. There are however, some issues that the states have found with that combined federal state filing program, primarily being that the state doesn't get the information for that until summertime, so June, July, August. Again, the IRS just working under the restrictions that the IRS has in terms of budget, in terms of personnel, in terms of computer technology. It takes them a while to get that information all loaded into their system and then turned around and sent out to the states. So we'll get a call occasionally from a client or even from an accountant who has a client who received a letter, received a notice from their state saying, "Hey, we didn't get your 1099 forms this year. What's up?" And so we will just verify that they're in California or Maryland or somewhere like that that is a participating combined federal state filing program state. And once we confirm that, we will let the client know that it's just that the IRS hasn't sent that information over to the state yet, because we hear those in March and April, and so it's just a little bit later. So because of that, a lot of states have started to either drop out of the program or to require a direct-to-state filing for forms where tax has been withheld. A state like Oregon, a state like Pennsylvania, a state like Massachusetts, those are all states that have separate filing requirements. They want to get the information delivered directly to them as a state. There are some other states that participate in the combined federal state filing program, but that require, if you have a form with withholding on it, that you send that filing separately to the state. And then obviously there are states that don't require anything. So if you and your clients are in Florida or Texas, Washington State, Tennessee, congratulations, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. But for you guys who do have to worry about that, those are the main scenarios that you'll run into. Either the combined federal state filing program applies, or there's a direct to state filing requirement. So we do keep up with that ourselves. We updated Tax 1099 this year to make it a little bit more streamlined in terms of how that state filing occurs. It's always been there for manual form creation, but now we've got it for the imports that people are doing as well. Doing some automated recognition of the state of residence for the recipient, and then putting that state filing requirement on there. You always have the option to go back and change that if you need to. So if somebody moved from Pennsylvania and didn't have that actual filing requirement, they just never changed their address, you can remove that requirement yourself if you want to. But we'll automatically identify those filing requirements for you and make sure that we're helping you stay compliant as much as possible for all the different states, because there's a lot of them. It's hard to keep up with. We have our own internal tax analyst, and then we actually have some independent consultants who work for us as well, who do keep track of this, and so we compare and contrast on a continual basis, making sure that we've got everything covered with the states. A little brief section here on corrections. So we will find a lot of times that after the filing has gone to the IRS, you may have a situation where a client comes back and says, my recipient reminded me that $1,000 of that $15,000 payment that I gave them was actually expense reimbursement. It wasn't for services rendered, and so I need to change their dollar figure that we reported to the IRS from $15,000 down to $14,000. That's a pretty simple fix. It's just a type 1 correction. You create a brand new form, you check the box at the top, you enter the amount, the correct amount in the box that's supposed to be there, and you just submit that form. So very easy process to do that type 1 correction. You may also find that that the amount was just entered in the wrong box, especially if you have clients who are managing maybe QuickBooks themselves, and they go through and they do their 1099 wizard mapping, and they just accidentally pick the wrong box. They pick box 3 instead of box 7, or box 14 instead of box 1, or whatever it is. If you have that situation, then switching an amount from box 1 to box 7, or box 7 to box 3, or wherever, is very easy. It's just that type 1 correction, and you can check the box and do that 0 in the originally reported box, and do the amount in the box it should have actually been reported in. A bit more complicated are the type 2 corrections. This is where you have the name or the tax identification number incorrect for the vendor. Those are more complicated because the first step is to void out the form that you submitted. So just as an example, say that you submitted a form for a vendor and the last two digits of their taxpayer identification number were supposed to be 98, but it was entered as 89 when the client entered it into their accounting software. So you brought it over as it existed in the accounting software, not knowing any different. And just because of that transposition of the two digits there, the information is not correct. So the first thing you've got to do is file a voided form, a $0 form, wherever you reported that original box amount with the incorrect taxpayer identification number on it. So you've got to use the wrong taxpayer identification number and do a corrected form to void that out. Then the second thing you've got to do is create a brand new form, fill out that form basically as a regular form, not as a corrected form, but as a regular form, and submit that with the correct vendor and taxpayer identification number information on it. So two different types of corrections that you may run into. We do both of them inside of Tax 1099, so it is something that's available for you if you're using our platform. You could even do the corrected form if you didn't do the form originally inside of Tax 1099. We even go back a couple of years to let you do that if you need to. Geneva, I'm going to turn it back over to you for the next survey question.
Well, that's amazing. Let's go ahead and finish that third poll question here. If you needed to correct a dollar amount on a form that you submitted to the IRS, what type of correction is that you would need to make? Is it a type 1? Is it a type 2? For correcting a box amount? A lot of answers coming in already. Thanks again for everyone participating in this. Giving it a couple more seconds now. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end that voting here and share out these results. Looks like most of you got that answer correct, and that is the type 1 correction, so that's the more simple of the two. Like Ed was explaining, involve a voided form and filing a new form. It's just one corrected form, and you would replace the incorrect with the true amount. That's a good checkpoint right there for us to turn it back over to Ed and continued information.
All right, thanks, Geneva. I'm going to move on and talk about form delivery options now. If you've been doing this for a while, you know that in the past everybody just got a mailed form, whether you were printing that and mailing it yourself, tearing off the copy that belongs to the recipient and sending it out to them, or maybe you were you're large enough that you wanted to have someone else involved in that process, and maybe you outsource the mailing to a third party. There are organizations that's what they exist for, is just to kind of send the mail to the recipients while you're taking care of the filing yourself through a eFiling. There's more recently, though, electronic delivery available for the vendors. You can do that by email. That's one of the two methods that we offer. You can do it by a portal. That's the other method that we offer. Either way that you do that, there are a couple of requirements that you want to be aware of before you really move into eDelivery. The primary one being that you want to get the permission of the vendor. You want to have them opt in to receive their form electronically. So if you are sending the form to them electronically, and I'm saying you kind of in a broad sense, I know there's a lot of accountants that are here, and the accountants are probably working with clients. It may be the client's obligation to do that, capture that opt-in of information, but you'll need to collect that opt-in through the same method that you're sending the form itself. So if you're sending the form out via email, you want to capture the acceptance of that form, the affirmation that they will receive that electronically via email. If you're using a portal, then the portal probably has a built-in tool that captures that affirmation. It may just be in the terms and conditions of using that portal. We do have a workflow that's built in for our portal. So if you are using our portal, then we will capture that and retain it. There's even a report that shows who has opted in, who has not opted in. And so you can easily tell who you may need to send a paper form to if they've not opted in for that electronic delivery. And just a few little known facts about e-filing. We're calling them little known. If you've been e-filing with us in the past, you actually probably know these already. But joint submission for all vendor or payer. If you think back to paper filing, when you paper file, you might go to Staples. You might buy a box of 25 forms. It's going to have 25 1099 miscellaneous forms. It's going to have 3 1096s in it. And the reason it has 3 1096s, you might need to do a correction at some point in time, or maybe you forgot one. But the IRS really doesn't like to receive those in separate batches. They want to get everything at one time as much as possible for a paper filing. And the reason for that is that it's really just a pain for the IRS to do paper filing. They've got to intake the paper. They've got to have people who scan the documents. They've got to have people who verify that the boxes are reporting the right amounts, that the social is reporting in the right spot, that everything's lined up. It just takes a lot more work for the IRS to do the paper filing maintenance than it does for them to do the electronic filing. So with e-filing, you could submit as often as you like for a payer. If you have a client who's got a dozen forms that are ready on January 15th, you can go ahead and submit those, even though they may have 4 or 5 vendors that they're still trying to track down information on. You can submit those 4 or 5 later. You could submit those 4 or 5 one at a time as they come in, because the IRS, when they receive the e-file, it's just much easier on their systems to pull that data in and put it into their databases in the right places where it needs to go. The second item here for the 1096, the 1096 is not required at all for doing your electronic filing. The e-file actually replaces the 1096. So again, going back to that scenario where you bought a box of forms at Staples, if you've used all 3 of your 1096s, you've got to go buy another box of forms at Staples. That might not be so bad in January when Staples has pallets full of the forms sitting out there. But if you need to do a corrected form in July, then Staples is not going to have a whole lot available for you to get a new 1096 to send that in. So electronic filing always a little bit easier on the requirement there because you don't have to have the 1096. And then we talked a little bit about state filing. There are states that require separate filing. There are states that do take the combined federal state filing program. If you are in a state that does require separate filing and you're doing paper filing, just be sure that you are sending that to the appropriate place, or that you're applying to their rules. The states do change them, and so sometimes they may have accepted paper filing one year, and then the next year they require an electronic filing, whether that's you going and typing information in online, or submitting a text file up to them. They do change those requirements from time to time, so just be aware of that if you are in a state that requires a separate filing. A couple new things in Tax 1099 for this year. We have what's called a two-way sync for QuickBooks Online, Xero, and Bill.com. And that's really referring to the capture of the recipient information, the vendor information. We have W-9s that are available. You can send those via email to a vendor. You can do a 10 match through Tax 1099. And then once that's completed, you can sync that information back to your accounting software, QuickBooks Online, Xero, Bill.com. When you sync that information back, it will add a new vendor if that vendor doesn't exist under that taxpayer identification number, or if you already have someone there with that taxpayer identification number, maybe they just changed their name or address on the W-9 form, it will update the information on that already existing vendor record over in QuickBooks or Xero or Bill.com. The other good thing is that we'll send the PDF copy of the W-9 into that accounting software. So you have it in both places. You'll have it in Tax 1099 and in your accounting software for easy reference. So you can always pull that down if you need to, or if your client is accessing QuickBooks themselves, they'll be able to see that vendor information and W-9 as well. In the past, the second one here, in the past, we haven't been able to block a single form from a submission. So let's say that you submitted 10 forms at one time through Tax 1099, and you find out later that one of those vendors is a C corporation and didn't need to be notified, or you find out that all of the dollars that were paid out to that vendor were expense reimbursements, and so they didn't need to get one, and want to get a and don't they don't want it reported to the IRS. You in that situation would have had to go in and block all the forms and redo the single form or do a corrected filing for that one form. This year, as long as the forms are scheduled, you can go in and you can block one of the single forms there for that information. So you can block that single form out of that batch and not have to worry about messing up any of the other forms. And then we've added a notice management feature for enterprise. If you deal with taxes and your clients are receiving various types of notices, we've built a notice management feature that is available for enterprise subscription customers. There's an additional fee for it, but it is available if that's something that you are interested in. Talking about enterprise, so if you are using one of our Essential or eFile Plus accounts, you may not know what enterprise is or does, and it may not be important to you to know that. It's mostly built for larger accounting or bookkeeping firms or for accounts payable organizations that have multiple people involved in the process. So it's a bit more robust as far as the platform goes. Lets you create separate users with very specific rights and then give those users access only to specific companies or clients that they may need to have access to. And then you can set up some workflows so that you can have one person create the form, another person review the form, somebody else submit the form if you want to. There's separate logins and audit trails for each one of those users that you create out there, and you get 250 TIN matches that are included with that enterprise as well. So just a couple things there about the enterprise section. So I'm going to pull up my desktop. Give me just a moment to use the desktop sharing program here. And I'm going to pull that up and show you a couple of things in Tax1099 that have changed for the year. All right, so this is the dashboard. This is the dashboard that we introduced last year, so you may be familiar with this. I am in an enterprise account, so I do have the ability to add the notice management feature if that's something I want to do. Another thing that's different about my dashboard, because I have the enterprise, is I have 4 other um, statuses for my forms. I have some forms that may be submitted for review, some that have been reviewed and approved, some that have been reviewed and rejected, and then some that have been resubmitted after they were rejected by the reviewer. So I can look at those different four items. If you're in a standard plan, you don't have to worry about those. You'll see the regular not submitted, submitted, IRS approved, and so forth that you may be accustomed to seeing. I'm going to take us in next and show us on the Manage Recipient page what the options are there for doing that sync back to Xero, Bill.com, QuickBooks Online. So you've got those 3 buttons that are there. I'm going to pull up a different company here that has a little bit more robust information in it. So the situation here is I may have just collected information from this company. So you can see this W-9 was just completed back in mid-November. I can take that information, I can check that recipient, I can sync it back to Bill.com or QuickBooks Online or Xero, and anything that's changed here is going to go back over there. If that vendor didn't exist in that system in the first place, the information will create a vendor over in inside of that system. And the W-9 that is attached here will be sent over as a PDF copy and attached to the vendor record inside of that accounting software. I apologize, things run a little bit slow when I'm desktop sharing here, but this is what the form looks like. So it looks like just a standard W-9 form, and you've got an electronic signature that's captured there for that recipient. So I can sync that back over and just have that information matching in both places. Another new button that's here this year is this Export to Excel for all payers. What that allows me to do is to take all of my payers and all of my recipients and put them into an import template that is the same import template that we use in Tax1099. So I chose miscellaneous for my my particular download here. You can see it downloading. I'll open that in just a moment and show what that looks like. This is all of my payer information, so I just need to have that information available to create or update the recipient information. And then I've got my recipient information over here, And then as I scroll on further, I've got my boxes. So if you wanted to, you could use this as your starting point for doing import into Tax 1099. You just have to put in any new vendors, maybe remove somebody who didn't get paid this year and then put in the dollar figure amounts there. And you can always still use the other imports that we have available as well. But just wanted to point that option out as it is another new feature that we've got inside of Tax 1099. Next, I'm going to move over to our Manage Forms page. This is where the forms go once you've gone through and done the submission process. So once I've created forms, I've submitted them, I've gotten a reference number, paid for them, they're going to come live over here. I'm going to pull up some forms from a prior year, just because I don't have any for this year yet, I don't believe. So I'm going to pull up some forms from a prior year so you can kind of see the boxes fill in there. So a couple of things that are different here. One that I want to point out is these are these three columns: USPS, email, and state filing. We got feedback that when people would go through and do their form submission, they may not remember if they had or had not completed the checkbox that said, I want to mail this form, I want to email this form. There was a report available called the form delivery report. That report's still available, but there was a report available called the form delivery report. But you had to go and you had to pull the report and you had to look at the report and you had to maybe sort the report and it was more work. So we built in, based on feedback, these three columns. So I can easily tell if I requested to have that form mailed, or if I requested to have this form emailed, or if I did a direct state filing for this form. So we put those in there so you can just tell at a glance where you're already over here looking at the forms, or maybe you're downloading the PDF. You can tell really easily what you have or have not done for a particular form there. Similar to what we saw just a moment ago on the recipient page, I've got an export to Excel for all payers here. So if I pick a tax year up at the top of my box there, I can download all of my payers forms and download them into Excel. So it'll look very similar to what we just saw, except it will have the amounts that were filed for that tax year filled in for all of my clients and all of the recipients for my clients. Again, just another easy way to get some information out of the system that you have already put into the system. There's a button here for state filing. So again, in the past, we weren't able to come back and do a state filing after the federal filing had been done. You had to do them both at the same time, or you weren't able to do the state filing. So this year, again, based on feedback from users, we have taken and if you've done the federal filing already, let's say you have a client who's in Pennsylvania and they have a state filing obligation, but for whatever reason, you or the client chose not to do that initially. Then later you realize, yep, I actually do want to take advantage of the state filing. You can come back here, you can do the state filing for the forms that you had filed in 2018 for that federal filing for the client. So you've got some optionality there. And then I mentioned during the slide presentation that if you have a lot of forms in a particular reference number, you can see all of these end in 5.3, so these are all part of the same batch that I submitted, you would be able to go in and block a single form out of that batch now. Previously, you weren't able to block a single form, but now you are able to go in and block that single form. One more thing on this page, I'm going to scroll down a little bit here at the very bottom. It's easy to miss this, but down at the bottom, you'll see I've got this top bar that talks about 1099s, W-2s, and so forth, and then I've got my 940 series forms down here. So if you're doing any 940 series forms, then you would be able to find those PDF copies here. And again, don't actually have live data in here, but you would be able to see the PDF copy of that e-filed form for the 940, 941, and so on listed down here. It's easy to overlook, so I just want to point that out. That's not new, but it is easy to overlook. If you're doing filing direct to states through Tax 1099, so Oregon, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, all those that require something specific, you will see those here. We'll have a status of their filing to that state. It's a separate filing, obviously, from the federal, so we have to keep track of them separately. So you would see that here. What you won't see here are the combined federal state filing program states, because that is a combined filing that goes only to the IRS. It doesn't go to the states from us. It goes only to the IRS, and then the IRS sends it on to the state itself. And then if you're doing reconciliation forms, you'd find those living over here as well. So you've got a separate tab for finding the reconciliation forms that you may need to do. I'm going to click over real quickly into our new forms section. We do have a couple of new forms out here this year. We've added some forms for some of the territories. We had a request at ZeroCon, I think, from someone who does a significant number of Virgin Island forms. So we did create a couple of those instances. There's a couple of new forms here. The 98C is fairly new. So just some new forms that are out there. But just as kind of a quick refresher for doing the form entry, if you're doing just a single form for a client, you've used Tax 1099 in the past, maybe you need to do a corrected form, or you just want to do one form for that client. It's pretty simple to come through and just gather that information. You've already got it loaded in here. If it's an existing payer, if it's an existing recipient, then you've got all the information that's already in here. You'll just put the dollar figure in, and you can save and add a new 1099 miscellaneous, or you can save and continue for that 1099 miscellaneous and go and check that form out. And again, here's the corrected checkbox up at the top that you may find to be useful. One more thing that we did this year, we didn't talk about this in the slides, but if you've used us in the past with QuickBooks Desktop, you're probably familiar with using the plugin, with using the web connector. We built a little survey tool or a little wizard in here to help our clients who maybe aren't as familiar with QuickBooks Desktop and how to use Tax 1099 with QuickBooks Desktop. So if you guys, as accountants, you do it all the time, you can say, I'm an existing client, I know the process, you can exit, you can go in and do whatever you need to do for a particular client. But if you're not familiar with the process, then you can go through the wizard. You can click the Let's Go option. We'll do some validation questions with you. So if I say, no, I'm using QuickBooks Desktop 2012 because my client won't upgrade, then we really don't work with those versions. Intuit doesn't support versions past the last 3 years or so, and so we won't support those versions either, just because we're working pretty closely with Intuit in terms of the desktop plugin and web connector. So that would require an Excel import. I'm going to say yes, so I'm using 2018 or something. My question here, am I on a company network with a firewall, proxy server? Do I have antivirus? If I say yes to that question, then we're going to make a recommendation. We're going to say, well, you should probably use the web connector in that case. It's probably going to be easier for you to go through the process with the web connector. I'll say, okay. And then it's going to load in the page for me to do the web connector. I can download it, I can follow the instructions, and attach everything from my QuickBooks comp file over to Tax 1099 through the web connector. But let's say I got here and decided, oh no, you know what? I answered that question wrong. That's not really what I want to do. If I click back on my import QuickBooks Desktop, I'm going to get that pop up again. It's going to let me walk through the process again, and so I can go through the answers. And so you may do this for multiple clients. They may have different circumstances. I'm going to answer no to that question this time. They may have different circumstances, and so you may want to just walk through the process. But really, you're coming out at one of the two options, which is either the plugin or the web connector. This one's asking if I work QuickBooks in a hosted environment. If I say yes, then I get the web connector option. If I say no, I get another question. Do I have administrative privileges on my PC? In other words, can I download programs to my PC? If I say no, I get the web connector option. If I say yes, I get the question about being an administrative user in QuickBooks. Again, if I say no, I get the web connector. If I say yes, then I get the question about, do I have access to the PC or the server where QuickBooks Desktop is installed? If I say no, I get web connector. But if I say yes, then I am directed to use the plugin. Click OK, and it's going to take me to the plugin instruction page. So let me download the QuickBooks services and instructions for the plugin and go through the process that I need to do in order to install and run the plugin for Tax 1099. So I just wanted to run through that, so I didn't want anybody to be surprised when you go to the import QuickBooks Desktop page and that pops up. You again can exit out of that if you already know what you're doing and you're comfortable using it. You can just exit out of that and move forward with whatever process you're accustomed to. I mentioned the notices for available for enterprise clients, and you saw that I had the upgrade option on the primary screen. I had upgraded at one point in time. Now I just kind of have a couple of things that are sitting out here. But again, it's really just there so that if you have notices that your clients are receiving, it will help you go through some processes. You can upload the documentation that you might have received, the notice itself. You can put dates on tracking that information. You have to reply in 30 days or 45 days or 60 days. We've got all that kind of built into the system for your various tasks, and so you can just kind of manage some of those notices through here through that notice management tool. And then one more thing I want to point out on the enterprise side. On enterprise, we've got a couple of extra options this year. We have in the past, for the past few years, based on IRS recommendation, we've been masking the PDFs. So we've been only showing the last 4 digits of the tax identification number. You could unmask those if you want to, and you can do that under the Manage Forms page that we saw a few minutes ago. One thing that's different about it for all users now is that we are permitting you to unmask the PDF for any of your 2018 forms, even if they've already been submitted to IRS. In the past, you had to unmask them while they were still scheduled, but you can unmask them now, even if they've already been submitted to the IRS for 2018. But if you are an enterprise user, you can set that as a default at the account level. You can say, I don't want any of my PDFs for any of my users to be masked, and then we'll display the full 9 digits of that taxpayer identification number for the recipient. Again, the IRS doesn't recommend that. They recommend truncating that information for your security purposes for that vendor. But if that's something that you or your client chooses, then you can unmask that. The other option that's available here is to set a scheduled date for all of my 1099 Box 7 forms to be filed. So you can schedule the dates on an individual submission basis. So every time you submit forms, you can say, I want these to go January 31st, or if they're not Box 7, I want these to go March 31st. But for the Box 7 specifically, as an enterprise user, you can set that default and have it go out to January 31st for all of the filings that are happening underneath the account. And these two settings are only available to me as the account owner for the enterprise account. So my member users, even if they're administrators, they won't see those options. It's only available to me as the owner of the account. All right, well, with that, I think I'm going to flip us back over to our presentation. And Geneva, I'm going to turn it back over to you for questions that we might have in our last survey.
Yeah, thanks for all that information and thanks for showing us around a little bit inside Tax1099. Here's our last question to answer for this session. Which is not required when e-delivering forms to vendors? You see your options there on the screen. And after you've answered that question, go ahead and chat in any questions that you have for us. And we'd like to answer those either in the couple minutes that we have left, or we'll follow up by email with any of those questions that you have. Just waiting on a few responses here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the voting and share these results. It looks like most of you got that answer correct. You would not need a printer when you're e-delivering the forms. All of that's electronic. You would need a secure electronic method of delivery, and you would also need an opt-in from the vendor, which is something that not many people realize when they opt to e-deliver forms to vendors, and that's actually something that we had a question about. So Ed, how would you send a request to opt in to vendors? Is there anything that we offer in Tax 1099 that could do that versus how would someone manage that on their own? How would you send that request?
Yeah, if you're using the portal in Tax 1099 and it's just under the Manage Forms page where we just saw a moment ago, there's an option there. You select the recipient and you say send to portal. Then they get an email still. The email has instructions on what they need to do, and they click a link. And when they click that link, they need to opt in to receive the form electronically. They can opt in or opt out at their choice using the portal. If you're doing email, that's again something that you kind of capture separately yourself by sending that email out or having your client send that email out to the recipient so that they know that they're going to get an email, and it's probably good to let them know that they're going to get it from the support at tax1099.com or the no reply at tax1099.com, just so they know they're expecting it. When the email comes, it does say tax document from, and it says the client's name in the subject of the email.
That's great. Okay, and we had a follow-up to that from Laura. Thanks, Laura. Does the opt-in allow them to verify EIN and address?
They'll see the EIN and address. They'll see the address on their form when they download the form. They won't see the EIN because that's masked unless you unmask the PDF to show them what that EIN is. But they will only see that on the form itself. There's not a portion of the portal where they see that information. It's really just to download the form.
Okay, thanks. Another question, how is the plugin different from the web connector? Just a little recap of the information that you covered when you were showing us around Tax 1099. What are some of those differences?
Yeah, the plugin is built with Intuit's software development kit for their QuickBooks Desktop, and it actually attaches a menu item into the vendor menu for us specifically for Tax 1099. Though it requires you to run an executable file on your computer desktop, and that's why the questions about network, the questions about firewalls and antivirus are important because those can exclude an executable file from running. That's what they're there for, is to prevent you from running something that could potentially be harmful to your computer. And the firewall virus doesn't know the difference between a harmful application and a good application. So that's why the plugin can sometimes be a little more challenging to load in. The web connector is built using the same web connector that you may be familiar with from, say, T-Sheets or Expensify or someone like that. Those tools all use the same web connector. There are some different versions of the web connector depending on which version you've built in, but those are a little bit easier to install, and that's why we recommend those for hosted applications and for clients who are using networks. It can be a little bit easier to kind of get around some of those restrictions if you're using the web connector as opposed to using the plugin.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for explaining that. If you have any more questions, go ahead and chat those in. We have just a couple more minutes left. So if we aren't able to answer those in this session, we'll follow up by email. Just one more question, Ed, that we get pretty often. What determines the state filing requirements? Is state the vendor's in? What state the payer's in? Does it depend?
Yeah, it depends. So some states, like Oregon, require filing direct to the state, whether the payer or the payee live in the state or operate their business in the state. Some states are only interested in receiving the information if the person is a resident of that state. So it is, again, individualistic to the state. One of the great things about America is we've got lots of states, and you can live in any one that you choose, and but one of the bad things is that they all kind of make up their rules individually, and so it can be hard to track from a compliance standpoint. So each state kind of makes that determination on their own. So it does depend on the state as to whether they want to receive it, if it's the company that is headquartered there or the recipient who is living there.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that information. Looks like we're coming right up on the hour. So we want to thank everyone for joining this session. Thank you for your questions, for your participation in our polls. We're going to be sending out that recap email here shortly. That'll have the recording of this demo, It'll have the PDF of the slides, and we'll send out some information on how to get your CPE credit. Feel free to respond with any other feedback you have on this session or any other questions that you have for us, and we'd be happy to answer those. We hope that everyone was informed and helped by this session, and we hope that you all have a great weekend. Thanks again from Tax1099.